Lucia Cossu, voice teacher here. We are a weekly episode with voice series, step by step on voice, and bridging some gap. I will go on this time because I suspended for a little, going on with the explanation of my PEVoC presentation of last year, the one that put on the table the question I'm putting with my practice since 15 years. And it is the reason I'm doing those videos, and it is the reasons I made the posters to the Voice Foundation Symposium. And in some sort, it is the reason why I'm using the language I'm using and the perspective I'm using. It is to come away from the not so definite and not precise and not related to mechanisms of voice production and some historical or less historical practices, excellence, to work on voice, either ways on the movement and the structure directly or in phonation. And I say that because something that is not that appreciated and it is not especially so much explicited, while great singers, they do it. In great voice productions, we do it. And I speak as a singer and as a voice trainer, is that, yes, there is phonation, of course, but we prepare the phonation and we do many things before. In between the phonation, it is not only the breath. It has been called very often breath management, as if breath management was everything that was not directly phonation, meaning the tone production. Breath management can look as breath in some styles. It looks some other things in other styles. Because as we are understanding in this series, the perception depends on what we are activating, the response of the system, and the response of all the systems that we are using for phonation, because we have understood it's not just one, could be, but probably it would be boring and not so fantastic, this instrument, as it really is. So I go on with my PEVoC, and perhaps I'm helping you to bridge a bit this gap that there is. The cervical figure, they are independent in some ways, share some parts, and even something more tricky as the cervical segment. You see, for Grey Cook, they want it stable. We have a larynx. It doesn't think that we have a larynx. And I think we can say that the larynx wants to be mobile, and just yet we see something of a correlation. So I anticipated I look at posture and overall all the body as the environment in which the vocal system can operate and develop. In here I say two things. Do you remember the model you find in the video? The model says what it declares and more than that. What it declares is that our joints, as I said more than one time, do not have all the same function of the below and the above. What it means? It means that I ask sometimes my students and I say, okay, the hips want to do what? They don't want to move. They want to move. And want to move means that we have planes of movement. And into the hips, it is a very complex one. And you see in the model, wants to be mobile. Mobile, in this case, means 3 planes of motion. What is called the sagittal, the vertical, flexion, extension, flexion, extension, I come up, I'm sitting, I'm straight, and I flex. The frontal abduction, adduction, or what? of your legs and your knees, the hips are there. It is still a hips movement. Abduction, adduction, and something again that is not that appreciated if you are not into athletic development, or you are not a dancer, or you are not someone that specifically need that. Even in the workouts, in the gym is not so well explicited that, again, our hips there and our legs, there is an internal rotation of the femur towards the interior, or external rotation. And this is mean that it wants to be mobile. It wants to be mobile. It wants to have access to these three planes of motion. In which measure? That I'm making the case that for singers it is important too, because into my practice and into the literature that I'm studying, I see that they say basically the same things as my practice, that exactly some levels of extension, rotation, and abduction or adduction, you will have certain kind of development of the voice and functions into the voice. When I say literature, I say something, for example, as a study they've done on the neck muscles, which are not that easy to be trained, and they tried to see if they activated, for example, with some quite intuitive things as putting some weight on the head, and they did not activate. Doesn't mean that some muscles of the neck are not activated, but they are mostly paraspinal. They are not those muscle external that they were studying, and they wanted to train. You know, when they started being activated, you know, I talk about the hips joint quite a lot, and it's one of my hierarchical most important for human notion, as they are saying in literature. For me, for singing is, we have to take care of the hips joint. When they did put a resistance at the pelvis, the muscles of the neck, they activated and contracted. So, since we are making the ingredients of the voice, can we use some resistance, some movement to activate neck muscles, and so change what? How our order for phonation is going to find the structure for phonation. I make things of that kind with my students all the time, because what you don't realize is that if I put, as I did with Alice Roba, the videos of the lessons, you are going to look and to say, okay, but why does she ask those physical things? Can I do what she asked without the physical things? No. And it is a long time that you tell me, you do it there, okay, it's to relax the person. No. It's to have the voice in phonation toward the goal we want. Sometimes can be to change forever an asset of a structure, and sometimes can be just for a song to solve and to get to something of artistic with that song. What I'm doing now is explaining for everybody the research I've done and the results I have by working on the segments into the body which are related with voice production. And there I am showing that there is a model that explains everybody, even without my results, that the segments into the body has a say, and can be a very important say, into voice production. That is what I'm doing. I'm saying, okay, but still I'm working into a skeletal muscle system. Do we have a research into what yet you that works with voice has assessed to be important for voice production? And I just make the bridge and make you see in this study, in this research, in this mechanical way of functioning of the skeletal muscle system. You can call it musculoskeletal if you want. So I wanted just to arise a little bit more of attention if I say skeletal muscle system. I do for that, but it's musculoskeletal system, of course. The thing is, if they impact the diaphragm, doesn't matter if it is for an athlete or for singer, we will have an impact on the diaphragm. So what I'm telling here, it is something on which now I'm a bit divided into myself, and I will study better, and especially I hope to talk with someone specialized in that, so that he can correct me, or we can debate and dialogue a little to bring a better vision about this question that can be quite important. Is that I said, okay, you see there are all those joints that wants to be alternated, mobile, stable. We said the hips want to be mobile. The lumbar segment, this one, wants something pretty special. It wants to be stable. And all the core that for us must be divided, selected and defined into its sections. It's another thing on which I will say that is important, pretty important. The core in the last 20 years has not been anymore trained mostly by crunches and flexions, but more into anti-rotational exercises. And again, it is a way of preparing the body to be able to have the rotations without the injuries. And those have come before, after the model. Doesn't matter too much, we don't have to make history there. We have to make for singers, but there we can leave to them, discuss that. The thing is that this is what stable means. It means that it doesn't want to have the 3 planes of motion, so it has a lot of muscles. They are there to mitigate the movements of this segment, of this joint, because it's a joint, it's quite complex. Even if it is a segment of spine or column, okay? If you see thoracic wants to be mobile, how many of you have a really mobile thoracic segment? I don't think mine is yet good. I'm working on. My hips are definitely better. I'm working on internal, external rotation. There, rotator cuff, perhaps we have to ask to someone that is specialized in baseball. But we could say that as singers, we want to stabilize it. And that's why I was telling them, because again, if you have the information and the knowledge that it wants to be mobile, you're not thinking that making it completely stable always is such a good idea. Because if you make it stable, the model says something even more important, is that it is going to search for the movement that joint requires, meaning the movement of the body that requires that mobility. It is going to have some compensation into the same segment, into the thoracic segment, and especially being stable, it is going to find the movement in the upper and the below joint, the neck, cervical segment, and the lumbar segment. And the lumbar segment, again, as the neck, really, really want to be stable. Something that you understand immediately if you have played some sport is that the knees want to be stable. Again, they're pretty fragile. They have less muscle than your lumbar segment with the function of anti-rotation. Still, you know that you don't want to mobilize the knees because you know the ACL injury is quite common. What is again a little overlooked is everything not correct that the hips do when they are not mobile. And the poster on the sitting and hips joint was to put the accent in the fact that very often we have some problems into the voice that we cannot solve and we cannot make it work as with another, and can be the hips joint not mobile or not perfectly functional. Just the model says that if the hips joint is stiff, it is going to mobilize, transferring its movement as the thoracic segment to the lumbar segment, the above joint, and the knees. And if you want to sing, you want to have a perfect lumbar segment, because into the lumbar segment you have the core, that you know it's important for singing. And then you have the diaphragm that is dividing the two segments, the lumbar from the thoracic. Here it says something about the fact that into this model we don't have the larynx, because Gray Cook was working with athletes and general population, and usually they don't specifically give importance to the larynx. The larynx is into the neck, into the cervical segment. As I said, I have contrasted ideas. I don't think anymore that, as I said there, that the larynx wants to be mobile. Certainly it wants to have two planes of motion. You have inside, because you have muscles that adduct the vocal cord folds and muscles that abduct the vocal folds. Adduct is closing, abducting is opening. So, yet, you have a frontal plane for the larynx? Yes. You have all the structure of the larynx that is moving, sagittally meaning vertically, yes, with the cricothyroid muscles come up and down, and it puts the vocal folds, as Rubin told us, into the not horizontal position for phonation, that is always, all the time, with a bit of angle. And I said something that looks like just a phrase, and to me is the center of the thing that I want this year with this video series. Appreciate, start thinking about this fantastic instrument of yours and of mine. And it is that I consider the overall body and the postural segments as the environment in which the voice can operate and develop. You remember big box, small box? If your diaphragm, for example, as I said last time, for some defensive mechanism, or because simply your hips are not where they have to be, or you're too sedentary, can be many other reasons. For example, I just made some examples. Your diaphragm will be low positioned and pretty contracted, opened. So you will find in the resources I will put again this fantastic book, Functional Handbook, Functional Training Handbook, in which they have the photos of erector spinae constantly contracted at the place of other muscles that should do this work, compensations as we were saying previously, and diaphragm contracted into the low position. Do you remember from respiratory system? Hierarchies on what? Of survival. Inhalatory. Putting the air into. There is not an urgency to make you breathe out. So, when you are stressed or there is an emergency, the diaphragm can simply contract and go down and make the air enter. When we sing or when we do other things, these hierarchy exist. So it is favorized by a bad environment, we can say like that, or by an environment that doesn't take care of this disparity into diaphragm work, that your diaphragm simply is just too low, stuck all the time. And when you want to sing, you want a subglottal pressure. Vocal folds, line of the vocal folds, I put like that because they are here horizontal. The glottis is the line of closure of the vocal folds. Subglottal pressure is the pressure you have under the vocal folds closed. For phonation, it must be major pressure under than above. If you have your diaphragm stuck in inhale position, it would be very difficult to do that. And especially your diaphragm is not trained or able or capable, or your body in condition to have the diaphragm coming up. And to have a good diaphragm, it must be able to come up and come down, come up and contract down, come up and contract down. Then there are some breath managements pretty sophisticated that work with some preparations before and during and while singing to get more refined by not only having the diaphragm that contracts come down and relaxes come up, because this is not an activity without work, but it's relaxation. You are not making an activity, and while you're singing, I hope you are making an activity. We can have the diaphragm being contracted all the time you sing in different positions. And again, it's for the styles. And you can see that in singers all the time, because if you look at their waistline, their back, their sternum, their shoulders, you will see many variations, very difficult. You will see a diaphragm stuck low with the ribs all open and blocked open. I don't think you can comment and put there. Depend on the styles again. Some can do that. Blacksmith does that. Was into an extreme vocal. Usually you will see something else. We can make a little challenge. Write to me those with the photos or with the YouTube video or what you want. So the thing was there that environment is fundamental. One thing that I have the idea you don't realize directly is that you want to train the vocal folds and the air and the capacity for the air. But you don't realize that those segments, mobile, stable, and all the muscles of those segments have, in my hypothesis, but it is into the functional hypothesis also, have minimal requirements of functionality and mobility to state that the system is functional. Those minimal requirements I would like being translated for singing. Because there must be. Into my practice I have found some. And probably it will get into knowledge simply because we do like that. We put into and then we go on. But the thing is, this model yet states minimal requirements for functionality of the segments that we know we use to sing. The model says also that segments far from those that we know we use both for postural and phonation, so the segments far from, if they present a dysfunction and this dysfunction is not counteracted or solved completely, this dysfunction will migrate above or and below, but usually it migrates on both if you leave time enough. So it will propagate itself. When you become dysfunctional into the ankle, for example, you're going to mobilize the knees. When the knee starts being mobilized, you start fixing the hips. When you start fixing the hips, you start mobilizing the lumbar segment. So this is not to say, oh, we have to be perfect, getting perfect functionality. No. Relax. If you have a problem into the voice, you have a big asymmetry, you have your voice not working, it is worth to work on the proper segments. And if you find a sequel of these functions, to work on some functional patterns, and if you do workouts, add in some functional workouts or strategies, so to start getting sufficiently functional the segments involved into phone production, into tone production, voice production, phonation, I was saying, sometimes my head, so that first you solve the problems and second you improve your voice. And fourth, you start thinking that perhaps you can tap into more effects and training into your voice by those segments. This is something that I propose to you, and I say historically we've done all the time this. Do you remember Montserrat Caballé? First note, then up your rectus abdominis, and then produce the second note. If you understand that she wants to change your order, you're doing that with the rectus abdominis. With the second note, no. You want to change the environment in which you're going to give the order for this second note. And the second note will be in perfect pitch. She's doing what? She's changing the pool of the trachea. She's changing probably also the posture in all the segments with this posturing. She calls it breath. I call it rectus abdominis. You call it how you want. But in anatomical and biomechanical terms, it's easier because so we can understand each other with the other specializations, and especially they can help us to see what is not in our expertise and to really understand each other. We can explain them what is not sufficiently appreciated because they go to human motion and not voice production. But yeah, start understanding they are in parallel. Enjoy your weekend. See you next week. What is not in our expertise, and to really understand each other, we can explain them what is not sufficiently appreciated because they go to human motion and not voice production. But they are. Start understanding they are in parallel. Enjoy your weekend. See you next week. Being the smaller the vocal one, the smaller is into the bigger. They are independent in some ways, share some parts and even something more tricky as the cervical segment. You see? For Grey Cook, they want it stable. We have a larynx. He doesn't think that we have a larynx. And I think we can say that the larynx wants to be mobile. Anticipated, I look at posture and overall all the body as the environment in which the vocal system can operate and develop.